are the two of you now at 4.6.3? So we can go ahead and get started, and we don't need to do that. All right, so what we want to do is talk about the book, the characters specifically, because the topic that you're going to have focuses on the actual characters. And this is a tough book to keep all the characters straight. Because for one thing, you got to keep track of who's Union, who's Confederate. It's not like, you have one ethnic group of names and another group of ethnic names, so you can kind of keep them apart. These are all American names. And so, for me, Fremantle, I kept getting confused. I always thought that he was on the Union side, but he's Confederate, and I don't know why. And it's just one of those things, which is, probably par for the course with this book. So we'll talk about the book and the characters, and then we'll get into the actual writing topic and how to go about doing that. So this was actually the question that was in the Socratic Seminar discussion board, and it's to what extent do you agree or disagree with this quote? When men take up arms to set another man free, there is something sacred and holy in the warfare. That was Woodrow Wilson who said that. So these actually were quotes that were taken from the discussion board last year. There were only 3 people who responded to this, and they were short. So I kept these in from last year. So let's take a look and see what somebody else has said about this. I agree with this quote for several reasons. People are all created equally. So if someone decides to make others inferior to them, it is morally right to oppose that person. Although most of the men fighting had never seen a black person before, they still fought because they knew that they are equal and human lives matter. When Kilrain is talking about a Southerner, he remembers who stated that a Negro is not a man. He left the room because he knew that judging by color and race is a very small-minded way to think. Longstreet calls the battle a holy war because the cause they are fighting for is not for an inanimate object. It is for human lives, and protecting them is a sacred thing to do. So what do you guys think? Did this person nail it?
Yeah, I honestly think I agreed with it, but that was it.
Okay. Taylor. Now here's the thing. Why were the Confederates fighting the war? What was the problem that made them go to war?
Did it have to do with their land area, like that that the other people, or I can't remember, but like they weren't happy with how they were like on their part of the land, I guess.
Sort of. Taylor, do you know what the deal was with why they went to war? The United States when it was formed, the whole point was that each state would be its own little community, but in times of national trouble, we would help each other out. Mm-hmm. So the whole point was that the states should have the right, and actually it starts with the community. So within your community, they should have the first say, and then it moves out to that county, and then the state, and then it moves outward like that. The thing was with the southern states that were so highly dependent on slave labor, they needed, if they had to pay the people who picked their crops, then they wouldn't have, some of them wouldn't even profit if they had to pay. And so when the federal government decided that you must treat the slaves as equal, and therefore they must be paid, the states themselves thought, no, this is our decision. We get to decide what we're going to do. The federal government does not have the right to tell us what to do. We still hear that today. You still have, you know, a group of people who say the federal government has no right to tell us what we can and cannot do, because then it's no longer democracy, it's a dictatorship. The problem was they were talking about human lives, and the fact that Black people, you know, they said that a Black person was worth a third of a man when they were selling them. And so when the federal government comes along and says, no, all men are created equal, because that's actually what it says in our Constitution, then the states became upset that somebody was going to come in and tell them what to do. So it's not really that, were they racist? Sure. But it was so ingrained in their economy that they couldn't see what was actually happening in terms of human rights. And so when we look at this quote, the set the other men free, it's like they didn't see that part. They could not make that fit in their minds that the Black man was indeed a man. And that's why you have the, you know, that little conversation between Kilrain and doggone it. These names will kill me.
Yeah.
Every time I come to this. Area, Chamberlain, yeah. And they, you know, descriptions in each. Hey, if you're having problems with this, go back. Owen. So that's what's going on here, is that Union soldiers, some of them didn't think that Black men were whole men, but still they realized that, you know, it's within the deepest part of our nation and our Constitution that all men are created equal and all men have the same rights under the law. And so if they're not, that's what justice is. All men have the same rights under the law. And so are you fighting for justice, or are you fighting for, what would be the word when you're, you know, your independence, I guess, that you have the right to determine your own life. So that's what one, and that's pretty much the common theme. Somebody else said, I agree with Woodrow Wilson's quote, it's a very honorable thing for people to risk their lives to free those who can't free themselves. Most of the people fighting for the Union had never seen a Black man before in their lives, but they fought to free them anyway. In one of the book's more popular quotes, Kilrain says, but the thing is, you cannot judge a race. Any man who judges by the group is a peewit. I love that. You can call somebody and they're like, what?
Sure.
You take men one at a time, and I've seen a few Blacks that earned my respect. That's such an interesting line when you look at it. Kilrain. Is, you're right, it is separated, and that's just showing you just how, you know, how much tunnel vision was in these people's minds at the time. And the interesting thing is, if you go back into the South, it's still there.
Yeah.
Even around here, there's some places where it's still there, where the color of the skin, they're looking at the color of the skin, and it's determining how you treat that person. And it's just, like, you know, it's one of our own frailties, human frailties. And it doesn't seem to get better. Okay, so finishing up, Kilrain believes that the war is about equality and fairness. I think that the Union believing in and fighting for these values is what makes the warfare sacred holy. Interesting.
That was good. I like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into the actual discussion that will help with the tasks that you're going to have. So what were the internal conflicts that the character struggled with in Killer Angels? Let's remember first what internal conflicts are. You remember what those are? Taylor, do you know? That's eternal. It's a lot easier than you think. You had internal bleeding. Where was the bleeding? Inside. So internal, inside. This is a conflict that is going on within your body. So this has nothing to do, although the outward situation may themselves have conflict. You got to admit, the Civil War is one big conflict. Internal conflict is how are you going to deal with that external conflict, and how are you dealing with it? Do you feel as if you're physically adequate to take care of it? Are there emotional ties that are tugging at you? So internal conflicts mean everything that is within the person that kind of stops them from doing what they should be doing or what they shouldn't be doing. So if we start with General Lee, what are some of the things that General Lee by himself has to deal with? It was Longstreet. Because that actually is an external conflict. So he has the, but why is it internal? Because you're right. He has the conflict with Longstreet because there is an internal conflict he's dealing with. And what is that internal conflict? What does he feel are his own limitations? He's very headstrong, isn't he? You know where there's proof of that. Can you find? Um, yeah, it's easy once you see the table of contents and you can get into Lee. You just look for Lee.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in fact, the first time we see Lee is on page 73. Now, if we look for Longstreet, I don't think he did. Some of that internal conflict is showing up a little earlier, right before he meets Longstreet, because he gets Longstreet comes in at page 80. So what's going on in the first part of this that gives us clues as to Lee's own character deficiencies, what he sees inferior in himself?
Let's see. Kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like trying to find like evidence, you know.
It's there, but it's very subtle. If you look at the top of page 74, now part of the description it said earlier, we're on the top of page 74, Taylor, I hear you're back. It was not the pain that, remember that Lee is in his late 50s. He's, I think, 57, as I recall. And exactly. He is old. But now part of that is good in that he's had a lot of experience. Right. So that's why he's so good at his strategy and why he's able to kind of predict what the union's going to do. He knows the men who are leading the union, and he can kind of anticipate what they're doing. And that, I think, is why, Taylor, you're finding that he's kind of headstrong and he doesn't want to give in to Longstreet because he knows Longstreet doesn't have that kind of intuition. But but it was not the pain that troubled him. It was a sick, gray emptiness he knew too well. That sense of a hole clear through him like the blasted vacancy in the air. I've lost my place. Behind a shell burst. An enormous emptiness. The thing about the heart was that you could not coax it or force it as you could any other disease. Willpower meant nothing. The great cold message had come in the spring, and Lee carried it inside him every moment of every day and all through the night. That endless, breathless, inconsolable alarm. There is not much time. Beware. Prepare. Now, what's going on here? And what do you see, Julian?
Well, I think it kind of points out when he said, like, when it said the things on the very top and it said how he carried it inside him every moment of every day, like, that kind of points out that all that is in his head.
Yes. I mean, this is internal conflict. You want the definition of internal conflict? Now, what is it that he is carrying? What is going on in that head? The pain is going to indicate what? And he couldn't let. What is it? Okay. You guys are young. This is why you don't know what's going on here. I'm here. This is approximately where I am. I'm not 57 yet, but I'm pretty close. And when things start not working, you know that, oh gosh, the end is coming. Maybe not death necessarily, but the end of this career, or it could be the end of his, even his tactical senses, because the brain is one of those things that also can fail you in your older years. And so he's fearing the end. When you see there is not much time, beware, prepare, that there is an end coming. He may not know specifically what it is, but and remember, it's not the pain that troubles him. It's the emptiness. Now, what would the emptiness be? Right. And he's not the great man he once was. At least that's that one way to interpret it. The amazing thing about this is, I think Shara, now, if you read the prologue or the introduction, Shera did as much as he could to make this as historically accurate as possible. So he is reading the letters that Lee wrote, and you know, there have been interviews with all of these characters are real. All of them are real. Obviously, Michael Shera wasn't there to listen to these conversations, and he's certainly not in the heads of these guys, but he did his best to try and get in there.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it may not, I think Shera kind of leaves it open for us to interpret anyway, because what was going on in Lee's head? Here's this great general in the South, and what is his overall feeling about the war, just the reason they're fighting the war? Does he agree with it or not? And I think just military men. Do you know any military men or women?
Not really. No.
Know them, know them. I don't. I've had students go into the military and come back and visit me. And the funny part is that especially this one, and he said from the time he was a sophomore he was going to be a Marine. And I watched him kind of mature through high school. And then he went away to the academy. He came back a couple of years later. Oh my gosh, he was such a Marine. This is a Marine inside and out. He came and visited the class. He did all kinds of crazy push-ups, and his body was just sculpted. And he was tough, but he was, you know, you could see he was a military person. And so they are all military. It all becomes military. And I think with Lee, a lot of the little things that happen in between, what do you notice when he's not focused on the war? What is he focused on? Do you notice Lee, what are Lee's intermittent inner thoughts? Do you notice a pattern behind them? Constantly praying.
Yeah, actually.
There's these little prayers that he says every now and then. And despite all his knowledge and despite all his, you know, the experience that he has, he keeps saying God's will be done. So he's not, he has his own confidence in himself, but it's not strong. And what he lacks, he's trying to make up for in his faith. So it's
yeah, like I mean, page 264, he's a good God and says let it end soon. So like.
Right. Yeah, and you'll find that throughout the book. Every time we have Lee, he's constantly praying little prayers before and after.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's talk about Longstreet. Okay. Now, so we talked about there was a conflict between Lee and Longstreet, so that's an external conflict. Longstreet himself also has a conflict with Lee. What is that conflict? That Longstreet has with Lee. Or does Longstreet have? And you find evidence of that. No one's going to ask for it. This is because this is what we're looking for. This is what analysis is. just like in a science experiment, you have to have proof. And so you have to have, how do you know this is what's happening? Because this is over here, and it looks like that. So you would want to look in the sections that are Longstreet, and okay. Just remember that table of contents is so handy to find out where. That's why he purposely labeled it the way he did, even though it gets confusing. Which side are we on? Imagine living that. Okay. I love this image at the beginning of that page, chapter 5 on 330. Longstreet sat on a rail fence, hugging his chest with both arms. He suspended thinking. And I love it because it's both a figurative and a literal image. What does it mean to sit on a fence? Figuratively. It is literally, yes, it is. But what does it mean figuratively? Oh, I'm on the fence on that. I can't decide. I don't know which side to be on. I think you're right. Looking at 332. Oh, you're on 285. Okay. Is that where you're? You're right. 285. I think you're right because, sir, there are some things I must say. That's long. Lean on it again with that. The staff had moved back. The two generals were alone. Longstreet said, "Sir, my two divisions, Hood and McLaws, lost almost half their strength yesterday. Do you expect me to attack again that same high ground which they could not take yesterday at full strength, with so many officers lost, including Sam Hood?" Lee was expressionless. The eyes were black and still. Longstreet said, "Sir, there are now 3 Union Corps on the Rocky Hills on our flank. If I move my people forward, we'll have no flank at all. They'll simply swing around and crush us. There are 30,000 men on those heights to our right. Cavalry is moving out on my flank now. If I move Hood and McLaws, the whole rear of this army is open." Lee's head shifted slightly, imperceptibly. His eyes shifted. He had been set. Now he turned, looked away, looked down at the ground, then east again. After a moment, he said, "You say there is cavalry moving on your right. In what force?" 2 brigades at least. You have that from Gorey?" "Yes, sir." Lee nodded. "Gorey is accurate," he said. He sat pondering. "General," Longstreet said slowly, it is my considered opinion that a frontal assault here would be a disaster." Lee turned, frowned. The dark eyes flared for a moment, but he said nothing. Longstreet thought, "I do not want to hurt this man." He said slowly, "They are well entrenched. They mean to fight. They have good artillery and plenty of it. Any attack will be uphill over open ground. General, this is a bad decision. Have you ever seen a worse position? Here we are in a long line, spread all around them, a line 5 miles long. how can we coordinate an attack? So he's begging, begging, begging. And then what does Lee say at the bottom? They will break. You're right. So that's where that conflict, the external conflict, can be seen. Lee is too stubborn, too stuck in his ways, based on it, and he's probably overconfident, I think. Now, when he says to himself, I don't want to hurt this man, there's the inner conflict. Why doesn't he want to hurt the man? What point is he trying to prove, though? They shouldn't try and attack. Exactly. Well, yeah. To be more defensive than offensive, yes. We wouldn't die if we do it. And he doesn't want to hurt the man because he's an older, respected man, but the decision, as Longstreet sees it, is a death sentence to these men. And so for Longstreet, he's having to kind of wrestle with the fact, here is a respected general who has a history of victory and has made some great decisions, but he also sees the 57-year-old man who's starting to lose his maybe not his senses, but certainly he's weaker and physically, and some of the decisions he has made have shown to be bad ones. So he's starting to lose track of his record here. Okay. Chamberlain. Let's go to the Union now. What do you think are the internal conflicts Chamberlain has to deal with? I think we really get, I love the first look at Chamberlain when he's dealing with those mutineers. I think that's the first time we see him, isn't it? With the, yeah. Yeah, that's. Kind of get his philosophy. We get a really good look into his character when he's dealing with those mutineers. What do you remember about how he treats those mutineers? Chamberlain is the one that they tell him. He gets this order that he's supposed to take these 120 men because they're and since he's in the area, he gets them. And what was the order that he had? If you want to, you can do what to them? For me, this is always this is the one image in my mind that I'm always left with in Killer Angels. Page 18. Yep. Tell you what happened. My Irish accent's pretty bad, so my brain is really bad. And they were all sent home except 120, which had foolishly signed 3-year papers as though they had all 1 year to go. Only they all thought they were signing to fight with the second, and the second only, and so they mutinied. 120. Are you all right, Colonel? Chamberlain nodded vaguely. Now, there's clues in that. He nodded vaguely. What's going on in his head? What do you think might be going on? I guess we need to read a little more. Well, these poor fellows did not want to fight no more, naturally, being vain men of a certain intelligence. Remember, where it's Chamberlain from? Which state? It's at the beginning of the book, but I've forgotten, right? All right, let's go with it. Well, these poor fellows did not want to fight no more, naturally being vain. Nobody will send them home, and nobody knew what to do with them until they thought of us, being as we are the other main regiment here in the Army. There's a message here signed by Meade himself. That's the new general we got now, sir, if you can keep track as they go by. It's kind of a little crack to us, too. The message says they'll be sent here this morning, and they are to fight, and if they don't fight, you can feel free to shoot them. Shoot? Aye. Let me see. Chamberlain read painfully. There's more internal conflict. His head felt strange indeed, but he was coming awake into the morning as from a long way away, and he could begin to hear the bugles out across the field. Late to get moving today. Thank God. Somebody gave us an extra hour. Bless him. He read, "You are therefore authorized to shoot any man who refuses to do his duty." Shoot? He said, "These are all Maine men?" "Yes, sir. Fine big fellers. I've seen them, logging men. You may remember there was a bit of a brawl some months back during the mud march. These fellows were famous for their fists." 120? "Yes, sir." "Somebody's crazy." "Yes, sir." "How many men do we have now in this regiment?" Somewhat less than 250, sir, as of yesterday, counting the officers." "How do I take care of 120 mutinous men?" "Yes, sir," Kilrain sympathized. You'll have to talk to them." And do you remember eventually what happened with these men? He basically, his troops are all ready to flee. So he doesn't have a lot of men. If he had the fighting power of these 120, they would stand a better chance than what they were supposed to do. The first thing he does is he talks to them and he feeds them because they haven't been fed. If they weren't going to fight, they weren't going to eat. Well, that didn't make any sense at all to him. So he has the men go and eat, and then the leader, the ones they chose as their leader, he takes them aside and he talks to them about, I understand you got the shaft on this one, because technically it was a loophole, but these guys have been fighting for 2 years in a bloody war against their own countrymen, and they couldn't take it anymore. And so Chamberlain understands all of this, and what he does is he takes the men and he gives them this pep talk. And beautiful little pep talk. It'll be, I'll let you read that separately. Definitely something you want to go back into. Let's see. Where did it go? 29 into 31? Yeah. She's basically saying this. Different kind of war. This is the war that is fought for the rights of mankind. And therefore, when we fight this war, we're not fighting it for generals or for sides. We're fighting it for ourselves. We are protecting our own rights. And so he says, I would really appreciate it if you would fight with us. We need your help. If you don't, we'll figure out what to do with you, but we're not going to shoot you. And so he walks off, and then they kind of go away. And it's funny, his brother Tom there, Tom who says, boy, you sure do talk pretty, because only 6 of them decided not to fight. All the rest of them decided to fight. Okay. So, going back to Chamberlain, knowing now how he treated the mutineers, what are what's the internal conflict going on in his head, specifically with these men? He gives them food. He talks. He feels sympathy for them. When he's reading the and let's see, he gets the nodded vaguely. You can tell he's thinking. Reading, he's not. Well, yeah, he just woke up too. He may be trying to wake up, but he nods vaguely, and then he keeps asking, "Shoot, shoot." He knows these are his own men, and is fighting by his side, and he feels a responsibility for that. He really has compassion for the men that they're fighting the Union. And they basically tell him, we don't want you people telling us what to do. And so his internal conflict is that he knows this war shouldn't be happening, period. That everybody should have the same philosophy about the equality of man and justice and human rights. And soldiers, how would you classify Buford? What kind of a guy do you think he is?
Yeah, finding like places to stay, like battlefields and
If you were to look at him, he's taken away from the Union side, but he's younger and tougher. But you're right, he doesn't get the credit, and he does a lot of internal thinking. We know his mind, but I don't think the other soldiers do. If you look at Page 86. So the first attack was very short. Now he'll get it. Saying something. And it's all strategy and it's all prediction. He's using those clues. So he knows what. In the midst of lifting slowly, the rain was slackening, but Buford could not see the line. He felt the attack, matching the size of the attack like a whip up and down. Its attack reached the line and the while the rebel troops pushed his line and drew back, bloody, and tried again in another play. It's that grinning, the fact that he grins. He's kind of like, told you so. The fire spreading all down the line like a popping fuse. And then there was another long silence, and Buford could feel them reforming again, beginning for the first time to take this seriously. The next assault would be organized. He looked at his watch. Reynolds would be awake by now. They will have eaten their breakfast now, the infantry, and maybe they're on the march. Buford listened for the scattered fire patrols coming in, moving along his flank but lining the bill of missing. A long silence, then he massed assault. Buford he's got a brigade in position, that's all. He's hitting me with one brigade and I'm dug in. Lovely, lovely. We know his internal conflicts because he's thinking this whole thing. What are his internal conflicts? Can we figure out why he does it? In general, or I think there's a little bit of it in this situation when you move forward, because he's constantly waiting for Reynolds. It's like he needs confirmation from Reynolds. He needs Reynolds' help. He is predicting the Confederate moves. It's like he knows exactly what's going to happen, but because Reynolds isn't there, he just doesn't seem to feel confident in what he and his brigade is able to do. Then after Reynolds gets killed, does Buford change at all? In the back, this is the name of the characters that are back there. It tells what happens to them after the war. On 354, if you look at what happens to him, never to receive recognition for his part in choosing the ground and holding it, and in doing so, saving not only the battle, but perhaps he survives the summer, but is weakened by wounds. In December of that year, he goes down with pneumonia and dies. What is Buford's internal conflict? He holds everything indefinitely. He knows everything, but he does not express it. Maybe if he did, he'd get a little bit more credit, but it doesn't seem like he's willing to do that. He's not a prideful man. There are plenty of prideful men in this book, but he is not one. Okay, so, the second part is how do they deal with the conflict? So, if we look at Lee's internal conflict is his weakening condition, both mentally and physically. How does he deal with that conflict? We did discuss it. Already. At least we know what questions to look at before you start diving into the. What we talked about was his. These little prayers to kind of help him through. That's how he deals with it. What about Chamberlain? How does he deal with his conflict? We didn't discuss that. I mean, we talked about what he does, but we did not analyze what that all means. Looking at the mountaineers and the fact that he doesn't shoot them, that instead he brings them aside and he talks to them and he gives them this little pep talk and tells why he's fighting the war and will they help him. How is that a method of coping? How would you describe that as a method of coping? Yeah, he was very open and honest. And the thing is, he constantly tries to get information from other people. He dealt with this internal conflict of the war by trying to always justify and trying to make others justify. He's the one who asked Kilrain in that little video you saw at the very beginning, why are you fighting this war?
Oh, yeah.
And what does Kilrain say is his reason for fighting?
Did he say like for justice?
For justice. That's exactly it. So he seems to be satisfied when people know what they're fighting for, and especially if it kind of aligns with why he's fighting the war. He is fighting the war for human decency, civil rights, and so that seems to be the way that he's coping with it. Longstreet. Does Longstreet have a specific way that he deals with his internal conflict? Excellent, definitely. If he kept talking to him, he hoped to break him down. And Buford, does he have a way of dealing with this? Honestly, I'm not sure if he does. On page 148, when, let's see, he's with Gibbon. I have to refit my outfit. I've kind of gone back a little bit. I need orders. And he keeps saying, I just want orders. I need orders. He wants somebody else to tell him what to do. Confident? Right. Yeah, he needs some kind of confirmation or some kind of purpose, even though he himself has it within it. He never has the confidence to do it. And I think that's why he succumbs so easily to those wounds after the war. You know, seven months later, he dies at Christmas time. You know, that it seems to me like he didn't have an outlet. And he kept saying, I need orders. And they're saying, you're fine. You're good. You can go home now. And he doesn't, that's not his nature. So yeah, I don't really think he dealt with it necessarily. Okay. So what effect did these conflicts have on their already difficult lives as soldiers or leaders? And I think this question really is appealing to how do these internal conflicts, how do they kind of impact the war itself, or do they? Have these internal conflicts not been resolved, or? Hang on a second, Taylor. I think my Bluetooth thing is getting a lot of wind. Let me turn this off. Yeah, I'm going to turn off